As I alluded to earlier in the week, the Cardinals have many different ways they can go regarding roster construction. One way, the 49ers way. How can they improve upon it? How can they mimic it? Let's discuss.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Cardinals. Alex Clancy here. To my left on YouTube is Brian Peacock, host of Locked On 49ers. He and Eric Crocker do a fantastic job over there. Thanks for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen, free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go to the YouTube channel. You know the drill. As I've discussed throughout the week, the Cardinals have many different ways that they can continue to build this roster. They can go the Rams way by trading for talent. They can go the 49ers way by nailing draft picks, paying them a boatload of money, and then adding star talent. What did the 49ers do right? How can the Cardinals improve upon it? And we'll discuss the 49ers plan in this mini kind of crossover thing, kicking off both of our 9th respective years hosting our respective podcasts. That's bananas, dude. We were babies.
Absolutely insane. I didn't have any children when I started doing this daily. If I had children, I probably wouldn't have said, yeah, I'm going to do a daily podcast in 2017 in the off season. I started in January. So it's been 8 years since I started, going into year 9 here. And at the time I was like, I might be crazy telling David Locke, yeah, I'm going to do a podcast every day starting in the off season. But here we are, man. The growth here, it's been phenomenal. And I can't believe how far we've come as hosts, how far the network has come. It's been pretty awesome. So glad to kick off this offseason with a little Cards Niners crossover for year 9.
Hell yeah, dude. Because here's the thing. Regardless of what Cardinals fans think of the 49ers team, obviously rivals in the NFC West, regardless of how much shade is thrown at John Lynch for trading up and drafting Trey Lance, what they've done there, by and large, whether it was John Lynch or before, they've nailed the important draft picks, and they've paid all of them, for the most part, handsomely. George Kittle, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, etc., and they were able to make it work. And that's something for me that the Cardinals are on the precipice of having to do with Trey McBride. Garrett Williams is 2 years away. Paris Johnson Jr. is 2 years away. And I think the foresight to be able to take advantage of those rookie scale contracts before they become all-pro contracts is important. Talk to me and talk to the Locked On Cardinals fans about or the Arizona Cardinals fans, about what it looked like and the good stuff that came from it.
In a lot of ways, I think you could draw a parallel with where the Cardinals are and where the 49ers were going from, say 2018 into 2019, and the Niners won the Super Bowl that year. So it's a good place to be if you're the Arizona Cardinals, and kind of even the 20 to 21 season. And I'll tell you why in a second. But from jump with the San Francisco 49ers, 2017, like I started doing Locked On 49ers like the week before Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were hired. So their entire tenure has been my entire tenure doing this every day rather than doing a weekly podcast and working in radio. I'm on the Niners every single day now. And I've been on the Niners every single day for this entire tenure. What's funny is going back to it. Everybody knew that Kyle Shanahan was the guy they were trying to hire. And then they're like, and GM John Lynch is coming with him. And I was like, oh shoot, getting on the computer. I was like, there must be some guy named John Lynch that's in a front office somewhere that I don't know about. I was like, oh, that John Lynch, the Hall of Fame safety, the TV announcer, he's going to be the GM of the 49ers. And one thing that's been awesome, and if I was building a franchise, the number one thing I would take away from the 49ers is something they started with, and it was the working relationship between GM and head coach. And it's worked in their favor mostly. It's worked in their detriment at times as far as roster building goes, because Kyle Shanahan's in charge, but John Lynch is doing the work in the offseason. So if Kyle Shanahan says, hey, I want Dante Pettis, and we can't get out of the second round without Dante Pettis, John Lynch is like, geez, okay, I get him. Kyle wants him, so we got to go get Dante Pettis. And he does it. So their relationship's good, even if the wrong guy is drafted. We saw this with Trey Lance and the COVID offseason. Awful process to get there, but they worked together to try to hit a home run and raise their ceiling at quarterback. And that worked awfully. Terrible process. Don't do what the 49ers did there. But they got lucky and got their guy in the 7th round, the literal last pick in the draft, and somehow got a franchise quarterback that they're about to pay. So sometimes it's better to be lucky than good in some ways. But what they've done extremely well from jump is their relationship working together at the top of the 49ers organization. And the other thing they've done is day one, and again, it was good and bad. They didn't even scout Patrick Mahomes. They're like, we're not taking a quarterback. We're going to go get Kirk Cousins in free agency. We have to build the trenches up front. We know how important it is to have a good defensive line, so we're going to draft Solomon Thomas. It wasn't a great pick. The execution was bad, but the overall idea of working together at the top, building around the trenches, having a really good coach on offense, and then adding the talent on defense, it eventually happened. It just took a little while to get there for the 49ers. And the reason I draw a parallel to where the Cardinals are right now, they're early in a young regime with the new GM and new head coach. And there's, I think, some clear ways for the Arizona Cardinals to get better. And what happened in 2019? The 49ers defense was non-functional because they didn't have that pass rush. They didn't have the dudes up front. They had a couple of guys that were holdovers from past regimes. They had Eric Armstead. They had DeForest Buckner, but they needed some edge rushers. And they had Cassius Marsh as their number one pass rusher, right? And there was a famous 2018 offseason. And I'm like, dude, don't draft Dante Pettis, draft Harold Landry. You need some pass rush. And it was a famous quote from John Lynch. He's like, oh, Cassius Marsh can be real tough to beat out. And then they went through another season with Cassius Marsh, and they're like, we got to get better there. And they were bad enough to earn the number 2 pick in the draft. And so Nick Bosa, thankfully, because of the Cardinals who were number 1, drafted a quarterback, allowed the 49ers to get Nick Bosa at number 2. They also traded a 2nd-round pick just for the right to pay D Ford to be opposite him. And he didn't last very long because he was broken down. But for that season, 2019 season, all of a sudden the 49ers went from the number 2 pick in the draft to the Super Bowl because they had the right stuff going on offense. They found themselves a quarterback, and then they added what they needed to on the defensive side of the ball to really make the thing go. And I look at the Cardinals offseason, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I really think you could put a lot of resources into the defensive line, into that front 7, and the Cardinals might not be a team you want to play a lot next year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, hit on draft picks, obviously. That's the goal of everything. The thing that the 49ers have done well, and the reason why I wanted to talk to you today is they drafted the right positions for the need right then. And they knew, like, Fred Warner, an off-ball backer, people see it. Would you say that off-ball linebacker is a non-premium position for the 49ers? Or would you say it's pretty premium?
I would say it's becoming more premium for the entire NFL, but it's still non-premium. But it's so hard to find the top guys that are good against the run that can also cover. So in that regard, certain safeties and certain linebackers are becoming more valuable, while it's still not the same, like, thumper middle linebacker Ray Lewis position that it used to be.
Right. But I mean, if you have Bobby Wagner, or you have Fred Warner, it's a premium position. If you have Budda Baker, it's a premium position for your team because the allocation of talent can be paper mached into what defensive scheme you want to run.
I would argue that it's not a premium position still, but if you have a premium player, it becomes a premium position because of the way the player plays it. Talking about tight end with George Kittle, linebacker with Fred Warner, safety with Budda Baker. Those guys make it a premium position because of the way they play it.
Now, we're going to go over here for sure, but I want to ask you one other thing. So they drafted Fred Warner, drafted Nick Bosa, George Kittle, guys like that. They paid a lot of money. Debo, Brandon Ayuk, irrespective of if it was the right move to pay those players, that's not what this is about. This is more about the overarching theme and journey of the 49ers over the last handful of years. Then they trade for Trent Williams. Then they trade for Christian McCaffrey. And the timing of that seemed to be from my stoop here in Arizona, seemed to be maybe, especially the Christian McCaffrey, just a tick too late to extend everybody getting paid. Is that right? Like, if they did it a year earlier, would things be completely different?
I think we're starting to see a little bit of a house of cards for the 49ers as far as salary cap. And the thing is they started with such a blank slate that they could do some upfront contracts. The Jimmy G contract, they made him the highest paid quarterback in the league when they signed him after 5 games. But it didn't matter because they had so much cap space that they just front loaded it. And then there was no guarantees at the end of the contract. And so really it didn't matter. But they've gotten to the point where they've had to pay so many guys that now you're starting to see void years stacking up. And the Debo Samuel one this offseason starts to get very interesting because you look at it and you're like, well, if you were going to trade him, you shouldn't have restructured his contract. It was only a 3-year contract. And then like a year or two in, they restructured it already, added void years to get the cap numbers down. And now it's going to be a whole bunch of dead money if they have to pay money to trade him, to have him off of the roster this offseason. So you are starting to see a situation where the 49ers they were able to pay guys. They were able to get through the salary cap stuff. But you're also starting to look at a team where it's like, okay, getting a little bit older, getting a little bit slower. Do we go all in now? Because if we go all in now, we might start to look like the Los Angeles Rams, where it might fall apart pretty quick. And so you better win that Lombardi if you're going to do that, or you got to start taking your medicine with the salary cap and let some of these guys age out and get them onto other rosters and go the Patriot way and start drafting and developing behind them. And right now it sounds like the 49ers are probably leaning more toward going all in and saying, you know what, we'll worry about the future in the future.
Yeah, they're going to be the Saints in 2 years. I mean, like but the thing is, like with the 49ers, with the Cardinals, and the next segment, the reason we wanted to do this is how the 49ers could have done things differently, because in my opinion, the Cardinals are they've got all the money, they've got all the picks. And this is the year too early. It's the Belichickian way. Do it a year earlier. It's going to benefit you, where you can capitalize on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s contract, and Garrett Williams, and Paris Johnson Jr., Darius Robinson, Abijah Ojolari, and Dadrian Taylor Demerson, all these guys who aren't going to get a contract extension for a while, do it now. So if the 49ers were to do things differently, what would that have looked like in the eyes of Brian Peacock? I'll discuss that next. Locked on Cardinals, your team every day. This episode of Locked on Cardinals is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5, and your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that will work just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. This is how it works. The Post Your Job feature, LinkedIn's new feature, can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insight. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Always fun chopping it up with my boy Brian Peacock at BD Peacock on Twitter, host of Locked on 49ers with Eric Crocker. Again, do a great job over there. See, the jealousy level, Brian, it's not so much of the wins and losses. It's always the 49ers tied to blank, tied to free agent, tied to this, tied to that, because it shows that even though there's a high wire act currently in place, that doesn't mean that there aren't 8 safety nets underneath it if structured properly. And that's what they've been able to manicure and do in an effort to get out of the doldrums and make the Super Bowl the next year in 2019. So talk to me about what the 49ers could have done better in an effort to elongate while still staying relevant.
Yeah, it's a pretty simple thing for me. And I point to 2 moves right now that would have really changed things. And look, it's a good problem to have enough good players that you need to pay top of the market money, right? You have to have a Fred Warner to pay him the highest of any linebacker. You have to have a George Kittle, and you drafted him in the 5th round. And that's probably one of the other things that I'll talk about is things that the Niners did right is they've done some weird stuff in the early rounds, which I'm going to get to in a second, which was the bad. But the good is they find these players that are wired the right way. The George Kittles in the 5th round, Talanoa Hufanga, Dre Greenlaw. Once it's like, okay, the perfect prospects are gone. We're not chasing 40 times anymore. Who's an absolute animal? And those are all the hits they've had. So it's a really good lesson in scouting. You're looking at the draft reports. I don't care how fast you are. Are you an absolute animal? Those are the guys you want to have on your football team, right? And in the 1st round, you can try to find the guys that do have the good 40 times and play like an animal. You get into the 3rd round, you're like, oh, are we going to chase the player? Or are we going to chase the combine stuff? And the 49ers have whiffed in the late 3rd round on drafting guys that look the part, they don't play the part. And then in the 5th round, they draft the guys that don't look the part necessarily, don't have the resume, but they play the part. And those have been the hits. So that's where you're going to find your hits in the NFL draft. It's all about the dude. How do they play? And a lot of hits there. The 49ers have created a weird spot for themselves. And that's where you get older, you have to pay a lot to a lot of guys, because 3 first-round picks and a 3rd for Trey Lance, you got nothing for it. Last season, they got nothing for second, third, fourth, fifth round pick that they traded for Christian McCaffrey. And I was one of the few people, and it's funny how this comes around. I was one of the few people originally who's like, oof, probably wouldn't have done that for Christian McCaffrey, not because McCaffrey's not great, but because he's a running back. And there's the famous joke about the airplane crash, and then the black box survived. So why don't they make the whole plane out of the black box? Well, plane can't fly if you make it out of the black box. You never build the thing out of the running back. You add the running back on top. And I think the 49ers probably paid too much because they had to go top of the market dollars salary to pay McCaffrey and all the draft picks. Like the Philadelphia Eagles only had to pay salary for Saquon Barkley. Right. And it was the icing on the cake. And so when it comes to running backs, icing on the cake, you don't build it out of the running back. I still believe that, even though we've seen awesome seasons from McCaffrey, awesome seasons from Derrick Henry in a new spot, awesome seasons from Saquon Barkley. Well, guess what? The teams that had him before won nothing trying to build it out of the running back. But when you take a running back and plop him on a good team, now it starts to look phenomenal. But now you also see the attrition level, and the Niners got nothing out of Christian McCaffrey last year. But those are 8 draft picks that should be talented players on the 49ers. There should be a few starters in there, maybe a star player, maybe just some role players. But the 49ers have to make up for those lack of picks. So there has been a vacuum created by some trades that the 49ers have made being aggressive. And so if you're going to be an organization that's really aggressive and then you lose the draft picks, well, how do you make up from that? Well, you're more aggressive again to replace the things that you don't have that you're trying. And so then that's when you start to get into trouble. And so do you just keep going down that path and you trade the 11th pick for Myles Garrett? Or do you say, we got to be smart. Let's actually trade back from 11, get a lot more draft picks and make up for some of the vacuum.
That, I got to ask you this, because I don't know who I am right now when it comes to the capital, go get players, trade, or continue to say it, because this is the thing that I'm struggling with. How young do you have to be? How much pressure are you going to put on second-year guys to lead the charge because you're drafting 2 edge rushers with a room that's devoid of talent right now? Or do you go get a guy you've seen for 5 years do it? You pay a little bit of a premium, and you have a guy who's ready to rock with younger players. Like, how young do you have to get?
I like to do both, especially if you're in the position. Of course. If you're the position the Cardinals are, and let's say we have to do this one thing, get a free agent and draft a guy. Draft 2 guys. I really like what the Green Bay Packers do in the draft. When they have a need, they don't draft a wide receiver and they're like, cool, we got a wide receiver. They draft 2 wide receivers. They draft 3 wide receivers, right? And sometimes it's the 3rd wide receiver that's the good one out of the ones that you drafted. And they've done a really good job of doing that multiple times at different positions with their draft strategy. And with the draft, you're only going to hit 50% most of the time. So if you need something in the draft, draft 2 of them, because if they both hit, great. Now you got extra. Or you go draft and free agency. Get a veterans that we can plug in, but then you got to still attack that in the draft as well, especially if you have fewer needs. And I think the Cardinals are close, and I think it's pretty obvious what their needs are. And I think you can go out and attack it from both sides. You can spend the money on it. And when the Cards don't have a cheap quarterback, but they have a lot of other cheap foundational players. The Niners were able to do whatever they want with a $900,000 quarterback. And when I talk about how it might look different in the future, 2026, 2027, going from a $0 million quarterback to $60 million quarterback is going to change the equation for the San Francisco 49ers. And then you get Trent retiring, and then you get an old 30-year-old running back who may or may not still be the guy, and may not still be on the team. No Debo. How different does the 49ers look from the injured Niners we saw last year that only won 6 games? So that's really the question with the 49ers and where this thing could go. And that's where those 8 draft picks could really help the 49ers going forward. So a lot of good, some bad. There's a lot of things to learn from it. But yes, attack when you have a cheap foundation, I think, is the only way to go about it in the NFL.
Yeah. So that's agreed. And it's like, it could be said that Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams were the 2 most important acquisitions via trade or otherwise draft that they won when they were on the field. They didn't when they weren't. So it's fascinating where it's like, yes, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner are absolute, maulers. Sarkisius Ward, like all the moves they made on defense seemed to work, and it still didn't matter when Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey weren't on the field, which is the mind screw of everything. It's like there's no right way to build a roster, and there is a wrong way, but there's no right way, because you have to get so lucky when the push comes to shove in the Super Bowl anyways to actually win one, that it's just like, why are we even doing this? Why do we have jobs? Why do I even turn a camera on every damn day?
And you have to be lucky, even like the 49ers, you don't, the Trent Williams thing kind of falls in your lap. You don't like Kyle Shanahan coached Trent Williams, and Trent Williams liked the 49ers because of that. There's no other Trent Williams. Like when Trent Williams retires, the 49ers can't make that move possible.
Right.
The league has to allow that to even be there for you. And then the Niners were willing to trade for him, and they only had to give up like a third and a fourth or whatever it was. They didn't have to give up a lot for how
$180 million, but yeah,
because of the circumstances, and he was coming off an injury, and everything was weird, and he wanted out of Washington, and he liked the 49ers, and apparently the Vikings almost traded for him, but the Vikings wanted to do a new deal. Trent didn't want to do a new deal yet. He wanted to play a season first, then do a new deal. The 49ers were okay with that. The Vikings weren't. So a lot of things had to happen just for that even to be available to get the best left tackle in the NFL. So when Trent Williams retires, it's not like there's a move. Oh, sure. Hey, let's go get the best tackle in the NFL for a third and a fourth. It's not like that deal is going to be there again for any team. And so it's good to be, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, right? And so that's where the team building stuff comes in. And that's where I would really applaud Howie Roseman and this build for the Eagles, because he creates his own luck. And not only has he built the talented team, he's also drafted the talent that replaces the talent that leaves. So you draft Nolan Smith, who runs a 4.3 because he falls into your lap at pick 31 or whatever it is, and then you can let Hassan Reddick go because you have the guy that you already drafted that is going to replace him on your roster. You trade with the Saints to get an extra first round in the future. And guess what? The league doesn't really like Jalen Carter's rap sheet. And so he falls to you at pick 9 or whatever. And so then you have an extra pick that you created, and you created a roster that can handle drafting this player that could be a superstar, but could be a bust, but you have the roster that can handle that. So that's where I think a team like the Eagles have done so well, and Howie Roseman deserves all the flowers that he gets, because he's created his own luck in a lot of ways. And if you're going to build a football team, I've always been in trade down, get more picks, get more, allow yourself to take advantage of it. And where the 49ers are right now, they've kind of gone the other way and been super aggressive, which has made them a good football team, but could potentially all fall apart. And so do you just keep being aggressive and then not worry about if it falls apart? Or do you try to backtrack on that and be like, okay, we got to slow down. We got an expensive quarterback now. Let's build it slow and see what happens. And then maybe you're not quite a powerhouse team in 2027. You're just a good team.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You got to go win a Super Bowl right now and go just trade for Myles Garrett and say, screw it, F them picks.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because Monty Osborne has shown somehow it's very infancy stages. I mean, also, let's be honest, before we move on to the most important, 12 dudes or, 9 dudes, whatever it is, depending on formation on an NFL roster, the trenches in the final segment. Howie Roseman has also been kind of that guy who picks 11th in a fantasy football draft, and there's terrible drafters in front of him, and you get Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon at 11 in the turn. The fact that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean fell to where that happened, and then Jalen Carter, the Bears just are like, yeah, sure, you can leapfrog us to take Jalen Carter, which everybody knew, and we'll take Broderick. It's like, or not Broderick. It was like, what are we doing here? Like the luck. You're right. It does make their own luck because they've had guys that have been ADP 15 picks higher just drop into their lap, and they've built something out of it. So whatever that is with the Cosmos, it has nothing to do with the 49ers or Cardinals. So that's about it for that. Next, the trenches. What it's been like to have one of the most formidable fronts on both sides of the ball, the 49ers, and how close the Cardinals are to getting there. We'll finish up here. Brian Peacock, Locked on 49ers, Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals, mini crossover here. I'll be right back. This episode of Locked on Cardinals is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, man, and there's no better place to get in on all of it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a single same-game parlay. I'm seeing just all over Twitter, just screenshots of people doing like 4, who's going to make the first basket bets for like $3. They make 10 grand. FanDuel's got you covered with all of it, man, if you want to take a shot. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. This is awesome insight about the 49ers. Like, you think that you know enough because it's the NFC West. It's like the inner workings of somebody who hosts a daily podcast talking about one specific team. It's like you find out a lot. And this is why I wanted Locked On Cardinals watchers and listeners to hear this, because 49ers have been great and they've been terrible, and they've been great and they've been terrible with drafting and roster construction. It's not perfect, but if you do things at the right time, you strike, it can lead to outhouse to Super Bowl, appearance in 1 year kind of transition. So, I mean, Peacock, listen, one of the things that's been the calling card for the 49ers, at least ever since Kyler Murray's been drafted, is that front. Defensive side of the ball, trenches, interior defensive line, edge, backers, whatever it is. And the offensive line as well, led by Trent Williams, Mike McGlinchey. Like, they've had dudes for a long time. What has it been like when both of those entities are elite?
It was a rough season, and you could kind of see it coming from the 49ers perspective, because it's like, okay, Bosa is Bosa, he's a former defensive player of the year. He's a really good player, but replacing Eric Armstead, you realize how good he was when you see Malik Collins come in as the replacement. And Malik Collins is a pro. He's a good player, but I can't think of a single impactful play he made all season for the 49ers. So the 49ers really just had kind of guys and Nick Bosa on the defensive line. And it's not going to cut it unless you have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and we just saw again in the Super Bowl, Howie Roseman, that team again, the Eagles. How do you beat a team that has a better quarterback than you? And this is where the whole running back thing comes in. Like, okay, running back was cool. They stopped Saquon Barkley. Why did they win that game? It was because you either have the great quarterback and he does all the stuff for you and you win, and you make his life easy, or you make the opposing quarterback's life so difficult that now your quarterback's better. It's all about the quarterback in the NFL. Get the best quarterback you can, help out your quarterback, and damn sure better affect the other team's quarterback. And at the simplest in today's NFL, that should be what you're efforting to do every single offseason. The 49ers did not make life that difficult for opposing quarterbacks last year, as they have since 2019. And so that's where you go back to the drawing board. So the trenches are so important. You got to be able to stop the run so you can pin your ears back and go get them on 3rd and long. The 49ers weren't good at any of those things. They weren't good at pressuring quarterbacks on 3rd down. They weren't good at stopping the run on 1st down. And teams could go against the Niners and say, well, you got one guy, so we'll put some extra attention there and good luck. And it just kind of all fell apart. And the 49ers offensive line kind of was average. It wasn't bad. But again, when they needed short yardage, they aren't a powerhouse line to get it. When they needed 3rd and 8 and needed some extra time to throw, they didn't have receivers getting that open, and they didn't have an offensive line that was really good protecting in those situations, even though the offensive line and defensive lines, if you look at it overall, they were okay. But you've got to dominate there if you're the 49ers, and that's what they've done in the past. They did not do that last year. That is the only goal. It's not just the number one goal. It's the only goal this offseason for the 49ers is to dominate the trenches, draft, trades, free agency, whatever it is. It better be offensive, defensive line.
Yeah, see, that's the thing for me that I go back and forth with. Like, I'm right now, for now, I mean, the draft is months away. For now, I think the Cardinals should take the best offensive lineman at 16. I just take them, because the thing that I go back and forth in my own brain and arguing with myself on my podcast is, would you rather have a defensive line that is a B- grade and an offensive line with a B+ grade? Or would you rather have a defensive line with a C+ grade and an offensive line with an A+ grade? It's like, do you split the middle? Do you waffle between both sides of the fence? Or do you say, you know what? If you don't protect the quarterback, bleep is going to work. Nothing's going to work. Or do you kind of hope that B+ is good enough so you can get some pressure on the pass rush or on the opposing quarterback with a pass rush?
I would argue that offensive line, I would agree with you, except for that with the offensive line, it's still a unit. And if you have Trent Williams and on one side and a swinging gate on the other side, it's still not that good. You need one unit of 5 offensive linemen. It is an offensive line. Defensive line, you're rotating guys in. You can have a one-dimensional run stuffing defensive tackle who weighs 315 pounds and he's only one down player, and you get him off the field, then you got the guy who's 290 pounds that rushes the passer and comes in on 3rd down. You can draft and develop those guys. You can find some of those one-dimensional guys a little bit later. You can filter all these guys in and bring them in waves. And on the offensive line, you can coach them up and you can draft guards and centers in later rounds. So unless you're talking about a pure offensive tackle, because it's so hard to find those guys outside of the top 20 of drafts that just fit the bill as, oh, this guy is legitimately a tackle, has the height, weight, speed, is a dancing bear. There's not that many humans. Go to the store. You'll find a lot of people who are shaped like running backs and safeties. You're not going to see very many guys who are 6'6" with 35-inch arms that are athletic and can move and be an offensive tackle in the NFL. And that's kind of where the 49ers fans, and we're kind of arguing about this right now, because like, well, you can coach up an offensive line. I would lean toward defensive line almost every time in that scenario of, is it, okay, which one do you want? Defensive line, offensive line? I want the defensive lineman. I want the nastiest, meanest pass rusher I can find if it's a tie. Except that, man, it's so hard to find a tackle. And in the second round, there might not be a tackle. So do you go with the tackle? And that leads me to the question, if I'm looking at a tiebreaker, I want the 49ers to steal whatever guy away from the Cardinals who are picking a few picks later. So what's that guy for the Niners that they could steal away from the Cardinals right now? Is it Will Campbell? Might be a guard. Is it Josh Simmons? Those are kind of the two names I'm looking at mostly for the Niners at pick 11. My two favorite guys on the offensive line. But man, deep down, I still would rather the pick probably be a nasty defensive lineman. Like I'll take Micah Parsons over Penei Sewell every day.
You know, the fascinating part is like, because I agree, like Josh Simmons, Ohio State, like it's a shoe-in. The Cardinals are Ohio State West now. Their offensive line coach is now part of the organization. So with all that being said, and we'll get out of here on this, it being Kyler Murray's make or break year, I can't help but have that be tie goes to O-line if you're going to pick, because you got to know without a shadow of a doubt. Some people already think they do. Some people have loathed Kyler Murray since the Cardinals took him over Nick Bosa or Quinnen Williams in the same 2019 draft. Like, I want to see the best offensive line the Cardinals have had in 20 years next year to see, because it's a high wire act without a safety net. And I want to see the wind starting to swing. There's a tornado around the damn corner. I want to know exactly what Kyler Murray is in a vacuum on 3rd and 8 where he doesn't have to run for his life for 17 weeks. And drafting an offensive lineman would all but solidify that, and not having to spend $50 million on a free agent offensive line with the Nate Solder effect, where the majority of them are a waste of money anyways at that point.
I think I'd go the other way.
Okay.
If I'm the Cardinals, I think I want that lineman. I think I want that defensive lineman, that pass rusher, because I just don't think the defense is going to be functional enough. And if Kyler Murray really is the guy, you got Paris Johnson. Like, how much? You can't have 5 Pro Bowlers on the offensive line. Like, at some point, the quarterback, the scheme on offense has to elevate. And you need to be able, the defense needs to be able to get you back on the field for the offense. So when I look at the Cardinals roster, I would probably lean defense and defensive line, even though you might get a nice little second-year bump from Darius Robinson, who's a player I liked a lot. And I was hoping he'd be there at 31 for the 49ers, and the Cardinals snatched our guy. So that's kind of why I want the Niners to snatch the Cardinals guy this year in the draft, because they have to be drafting a little bit lower. But just NFL defenses anymore, you got to have that front. And you got to be able to dominate there. And if Kyler Murray's the guy, he should be able to elevate. And you should be able to put together a line of a stud here, a really good player there, coach him up on the other guard, the other center spot. And if the right guy's there, you draft them. But man, you already got Paris Johnson. Go D-line. Go D-line Cardinals. That's the way to get there, in my opinion.
Strong argument. Peacock, tell them where they can find you, man.
Yep, at BD Peacock on Twitter. We got Locked On 49ers daily, and I also cover the entire NFL here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Myself and former NFL scout Matt Williamson, we break down the entire league daily. So sub up.
Here's to year 9, dude. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Remember, you're ready for my tagline. Without you, there is no me everydayers. I'll talk to you tomorrow.